I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I didn't cry with joy. When the numbers appeared on the television screen, one by one, 04, 17, 23, 36, 41, 12, perfectly matching the crumpled lottery ticket I had tucked into my 11th grade literature guide, I just sat there. The remote was clenched in my hand. My palm had gone cold, even though the heater was humming steadily. Some moments are supposed to mark a beginning. But that night, it felt like something had quietly ended. I had just stepped into a reality people like me, single women, 42 years old, living in quiet apartments that feel more like recovery rooms than homes, were never taught to expect. My name is Naomi Booker. I'm a high school teacher. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, a city of wood-paneled porches, mountain mist, and greetings that never quite reach the soul. My life was simple, predictable. So predictable that if you open the third drawer in my kitchen, you'd find exactly one container of salt, a rubber band, and 2 silver spoons that once belonged to my grandmother. Everything had its place, including me, until those numbers appeared. There was no one there to witness it, no one to call, no one to pop open a bottle of wine with. Just me, a bowl of reheated chicken soup from the night before, and the soft reflection of a television on the white wall, watching me back like it wasn't quite sure I was real. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, the place I'd stashed the ticket, almost as a joke, almost like hope wasn't something I was allowed to own. I held it in my hand, trembling, then sat down again. There was something old inside me, some ancient inheritance, that told me I couldn't possibly deserve this. Not because I didn't want happiness, but because I had been raised to believe that a good woman earns happiness through sacrifice, not through luck. I remember the old family tales my mother used to tell, stories where the eldest daughter is always the pillar, the fixer, the teacher, the one who balances everyone else. She never gets a chapter of her own. She is the supporting role in her father's cheating stories and her sister's revenge stories against prettier women with less shame and more freedom. I used to believe those stories, that if I stayed quiet long enough, caused no trouble, gave enough of myself, someone would see me. But that night I realized no one ever saw me, no one asked, and maybe no one ever cared whether I had something to say. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my sister. I called Celine, the only person who came to see me after my miscarriage without asking. Was it your fault? She arrived 25 minutes later. Didn't say much. Just sat beside me, looked at the ticket, and said, "Naomi, money doesn't change people. It reveals them." I nodded, and in that moment I knew this wasn't about what I would spend. It was about who I would choose to become. For once, I wasn't a character in someone else's play. I was holding the pen, and this time I would write the script. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of the alarm, but because the phone rang, loud, insistent, like a reminder that no matter what had changed, I was still Naomi, the agreeable one, the daughter who always answered. The screen showed a name I knew down to its punctuation, Mom. I let it ring 5 times before picking up. "Hi, sweetheart. I figured you might be busy, but I just wanted to ask, have you told Lila yet?" "No, congratulations." "No, I'm proud of you." "Just a question, sharp as a needle. Have you shared it yet?" I leaned back against the wall, gripping the phone. That question wasn't unfamiliar. It carried the shape of every conversation before it, those moments when I was praised as the good sister, the thoughtful daughter. Every compliment had been a thread tying me tighter to a role I didn't audition for but had somehow always played. I said, "Not yet. I need more time to think." There was a pause, soft as a wet cloth hitting the floor. Then she replied, voice sweet like honey left too long in the jar. Naomi, I'm not asking for myself, but you've always been a grateful daughter. And grateful daughters don't keep things all to themselves. I bit my lip. I used to think gratitude was the most beautiful thing a child could carry. But now it felt like a lifelong debt, a kind of hidden revenge disguised as a blessing. A silent expectation that the one who stays quiet must also be the one who gives the most. I thought back to when I was 14, the year I discovered my father had another woman. I overheard them talking on the phone, using pet names. I told my mother. She said I was imagining things. Then she punished me for hearing what shouldn't be heard. That was the day I realized some betrayal stories don't need proof. They survive on silence. I never mentioned it again, because in my family, the truth only mattered if it kept the picture intact. Mom continued, Lila's more fragile than you. She needs you. She's always needed you. I wanted to scream that I had needed someone too. When I worked 2 jobs to pay off my student loans. When the man I loved cheated and no one asked if I was okay. When I lost a child in a quiet ER room and not one person said, you're allowed to grieve. No one asked, because they believed I was strong. But strength is an armor. It's just the excuse people use not to check if you're bleeding. I ended the call with a familiar line. I'll think about it. But in my mind, I already had. That night, I opened an Excel file. For the first time in my life, I made 2 columns, what I had given and what I had received. Not to tally, not to accuse, but to finally face something I'd always avoided. Infidelity stories aren't always romantic. Sometimes they're between you and your blood, when the people you trust most betray that trust and call it family duty. I sat there for a long time. It felt like peeling off layers of clothes I'd worn my whole life. No one told me to take them off, but I knew, if I didn't, I'd never breathe right again. I wasn't angry at my mother. I was just sad for women like her, who spent their whole lives believing love must come with sacrifice. Tomorrow, maybe I'll answer again. But next time, the woman on the line won't be a good daughter. She'll be someone finally learning to love herself, for the first time, without needing permission. Sunday. It rained lightly, the kind of rain that doesn't soak your clothes, but leaves you feeling like you no longer belong anywhere the sun touches. I arrived early, because my mother believes that a good woman always comes early, sets the table, carries the dishes, straightens the slightly askew napkin, tiny actions praised as virtue, but really subtle tests of loyalty. The house hadn't changed. Gray walls. The smell of roast meat mixed with artificial jasmine from the automatic air freshener. Everything was staged like a weekly performance where every person knew their seat, and no one dared deviate from the script. I helped my mother slice bread while she complained about her back pain and her restless heart because Lila still hasn't settled. The story was never new. Only the phrasing grew more refined. When everyone had taken their place, I looked over at Lila, my younger sister, who was scrolling through her phone, yet still had the timing to toss out. You look different. Something good happened. I swallowed slowly. I won the lottery, I said, like I was commenting on the weather. 2.5 million. A utensil clattered. Lila looked up. My mother's eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but calculation. Not from a place of moral reflection, but from the Excel spreadsheet quietly running inside her head. I waited for a hug, for a God has blessed you. But the first thing she said was, Lila, tell your sister about your spa and wellness idea. I sat there, frozen. Not because I was shocked, but because I had been right. In this family, my value has always been directly proportional to how useful I could be. Lila launched into her pitch. Excited, eyes sparkling like she was presenting to venture capitalists. My mother nodded approvingly. My father chimed in. This timing is perfect. Naomi, this is your chance to help your sister. To help the family. No one asked if I was happy. No one asked what I wanted. I took a sip of water, cold, sharp. It scraped down my throat. I don't remember what I ate that day. Only the sound of the dishwasher afterward, more chilling than any unspoken thank you. I used to read cheating wife stories like dramatic tales that happened to other people. But today, I sat at my family's dinner table and realized this was a true infidelity story. No third party, no affairs, just the quiet betrayal that happens when people use blood ties to justify taking pieces of your dream without asking. In stories cheating, the main character usually finds a way to leave. But I just sat there as my mother gently placed a piece of meat on my plate and said, "You've always been the most useful daughter I've ever had. Useful. Not beloved. Not brilliant. Not loved for who I am. Useful." I left the dinner earlier than usual. Not out of anger, but because I knew if I stayed any longer, I'd slip right back into the mold, the woman who yields, who gives, who disappears by design. That night I wrote in my notebook, no one teaches women how to leave at the right time. We're only taught how to stay until we vanish. And I knew, this time, I would not perform the part again. I remember my mother's living room vividly. The floor creaked with every step. The air smelled like old perfume. And on the wall hung my parents' wedding photo, taken in 1978, when everything was still in black and white, and people believed love could survive both time and neglect. I sat on the worn brown leather chair, listening to my mother tell old stories, not in a storytelling tone, but in clipped, quiet sentences, as if each one were a blade sliding gently across her skin, not deep, but repeated enough to leave scars. "Your father once left for 3 months," she said, not angry. "You were 8. I didn't cry. I didn't ask where he went. I just stayed silent, because a good woman doesn't disturb the peace." I didn't respond, but in my head, I heard myself whisper, "That wasn't peace, Mama. That was discipline, sorrow." She went on, "Things pass if you don't speak of them. That's how I survived, and maybe you should learn the same." That sentence chilled me, not because she meant to hurt me, but because she truly believed silence was virtue. That when men stray, when families wound, when life eats you piece by piece, you should still smile, fold your pain into a drawer, and call it maturity. That's when I realized I didn't inherit silence. I was taught it, like a second language, passed from mother to daughter as a survival heirloom. Some family drama stories don't have climaxes. They are just long days where one person pretends not to notice, and another pretends not to care. And in between, a child, like me, grows up in the unnamed spaces. I used to imagine one day my mother would hug me and say, "I'm sorry," not because she was wrong, but because she let me live inside an infidelity story without words, where trust is betrayed not by men, but by the women who never dared to break the silence. When my father came back, she didn't ask where he had been. She made dinner, wiped the dust off the wedding photo, and said, "Men all have weak moments, but family is what matters most." That phrase echoed through my childhood, like a lullaby without melody. But that night, sitting across from her, 42 years old and newly rich, I looked into her tired eyes and understood. She wasn't cruel. She had simply never been allowed to speak. I stood up and said gently, "Mama, I don't want to live in the language of unfinished things anymore. I won't keep quiet just to keep others comfortable." She said nothing, didn't agree, didn't object. She just lowered her head, as if thinking of all the things she'd never said and everything I had just dared to. It was the first time I left her house without guilt. I didn't say I loved her. She didn't say she loved me. But between those two silences, I saw a crack, just wide enough for light to come in. When I was a child, I used to think Aunt Grace was a saint. She wore brown cardigans, always had peppermint candies in her purse, and kept a little notebook scribbled with to-do lists, things she had to do for other people. She had no children, no husband, but she had her own gospel of love, and it began with a line she often repeated. Sacrifice is the purest form of love. Back then, I believed it like scripture. Whenever my mother was tired, Aunt Grace came to clean the house, cook soup. When I struggled in school, she didn't scold. She sat with me late into the night, patient and present. And when my father walked out that year, it was her arms that held me, whispering that every family has a time when the train goes off track. Now, at 42, I see what that little girl never could. Aunt Grace didn't sacrifice because of love. She did it out of instinct, the kind of survival instinct women develop after being hurt, then learning that their safest place is in being irreplaceably useful. She loved through obedience. She was praised in family tales as the devoted sister, the selfless aunt, the woman who nurtured generations. But no one ever asked, who nurtured Aunt Grace? No one noticed the faint line in her planner next to piano recitals and doctor's appointments that read, "Therapist appointment canceled." I looked at her and understood. Some women live their entire lives as hymns of unrewarded sacrifice. Their only applause comes from the people who benefited, then quietly forgot. I used to think revenge was loud, screaming, breaking plates, burning bridges. But now I see a different kind of burning revenge. A woman who gives everything until there's nothing left. Who erases herself so thoroughly that even her own family forgets she ever had dreams of her own. That's human revenge, too, the kind no one names because it's masked as virtue. I visited her one rainy afternoon, brought the old umbrella and the rye bread she liked. She opened the door in the same cardigan. The same smile. Everything's fine. I didn't say much, just sat beside her and asked, "Have you ever hated anyone?" She smiled faintly and replied, "No, but there were times. I wished I wasn't so needed." And I understood that's the answer of someone who's experienced family betrayal, not by a single act, but by the relentless expectation that she exists only in service to others. That night, I wrote in my journal, some women are praised for giving too much, but that praise cannot fill a heart that has gone dry. I swear I won't become a story told in gratitude, then forgotten. For the first time, I understood love isn't sacrifice. It's the choice not to become a chair everyone sits on without ever asking. Are you tired? I received Lila's email on a Tuesday night. The subject line was in all caps, polite, perfectly her. Proposal for startup support, seeking family resources. I had to read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. It wasn't an email. It was a petition, an application for generosity, typed in Times New Roman, size 12, 1.5 spacing, as if formatting could turn entitlement into a virtue. Lila didn't call. She didn't ask how I was. She said nothing about the 40 years I'd stayed silent. She just wrote, "I know you're fair, and you know I'm capable. I just haven't been given the right kind of support." I used to believe words like that. When I worked 2 jobs to care for our sick mother and send Lila to college. When I paid off her credit card debt because she was going through a hard time. When I gave up my dream of a master's degree so she could have a reliable car. But not once did Lila name the things I gave up. Not once did she see me outside the frame of the sweet but boring older sister. She continued in her message. I think your lottery win is a chance for the whole family to rise together. After all, we're family. I laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that makes no sound. A twisted kind of revenge story, no screaming, no slamming doors. Just a person who gave too much, being asked to give more, as if generosity was a lifetime subscription. When we were kids, we'd tell each other family tales before bed. Lila used to say, "You're the main character." And I believed her, until I realized the main character never gets to rest. She only gets applause if she keeps sacrificing. I didn't reply right away. I stepped onto the balcony, stared at the city lights, and remember the night I learned Lila had lied to me just so she could go to prom with my ex-boyfriend. One of those cheating stories that seemed childish, but it never left me, because that was the first time I realized my sister could choose what she wanted, even if it broke me. I used to think forgiveness was freedom. Now I know forgiveness can't be a duty. It can't be summoned with attachments and formal language. I wrote back with just 2 lines. "Lila, this is my money, not a test of kinship, and I'm learning to keep what was once expected to be given." I hit send. I didn't feel guilty, only quiet, a quiet not born of pain, but of a woman who has finally realized she doesn't have to be the most generous one in every family story. The mirror wasn't big, an old wooden frame, carved with faded French floral motifs. I hung it in my bedroom 15 years ago, a gift from Celine, when I first moved into my little apartment in Hartford. "So you'll always see how beautiful you are. Don't forget yourself," she said with a wink. Celine was the kind of person everyone wanted to be loved by, radiant, witty, the kind who made you believe the world still had room for softness. But softness, I later learned, can hide many things. I saw it in the flicker of her eyes when she introduced me to her fiancé, Rick. He was polite. His handshake held just a moment too long. When I stepped back, I saw a tension pass across her face, then vanish, as if nothing had ever happened. I thought it was in my head, until 3 months after the wedding, Rick began texting me. Lightly at first. "How are you? Cold up there tonight?" Then the messages grew longer and warmer. I deleted them. I stayed silent. I did all the things a good woman is supposed to do in tangled infidelity stories, until one Friday night, I stood in front of the mirror Celine had given me, and I saw myself, not my face, but the distortion of endurance. I was trained to look away, a woman who had learned to survive by shrinking. I called Celine. I told her everything, every message, every time I pretended not to notice. Silence hung on the other end, thick as a winter with no birdsong. Then she said, softly, like wind slipping through a cracked window, "You're not the first." I didn't understand. She went on. "Rick was my old boyfriend before we got back together. But I knew he liked you." That sentence sliced through me like a bloodless wound. One of those betrayal stories no one teaches you how to untangle when the betrayer isn't outside the circle of love, but someone you once held as kin. Celine didn't cry. She just said, "I thought if I held him tight enough, if I married him, I'd win. But love isn't a contest, and winning doesn't mean keeping." That was the moment I understood. Hidden revenge isn't always fueled by hate. Sometimes, it's surviving the very thing that should have broken you and choosing not to betray yourself in the name of forgiveness. I kept the mirror, but I turned its face to the wall. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to let others define you by the cracks they made. Celine called many times after that. I didn't answer, not out of anger, but because I'm no longer the woman in the mirror she gave me. I'm learning to look straight at myself without needing anyone to confirm that I deserve peace. I didn't discover her affair through a message or the unfamiliar scent on her clothes. I discovered it through silence, a kind of silence that lingers without reason, without an end, as if someone in the house had died, yet no one had the courage to announce the funeral. Her name was Diane. We got married when I was 34. She used to smile with her whole face. I love that smile like one loves the first summer after a long, bitter winter. But that smile started fading after I won the lottery. People think money makes a marriage happier. Truth is, money only sharpens the things we had previously chosen to overlook. She started going out more, responded to texts faster when I wasn't home. But when I asked, she'd simply say, "You're being paranoid again." I stopped asking. Not because I believed her, but because I knew, in cheating wife stories, the truth isn't in the proof. It lives in the feeling when you walk into a room and the other person tucks away a part of themselves. She thought I didn't know, but I knew from how she said I instead of we, from how she leaned away when I accidentally brushed her hand. I'd read hundreds of stories cheating, but never thought I'd live inside one. I thought I was the main character. Turns out I was just a quiet witness in a tape that had been replayed too many times. One night, while she was sleeping, I opened her laptop. There was nothing explicit, but there was one email to someone named Kyle. Subject line, "Thank you for letting me be myself." I didn't read further. I didn't need to. Sometimes, a true infidelity story needs no detail. It just needs one sentence to let you know you were never really the place they wanted to belong. I didn't wake her. I didn't yell. I didn't leave. I just printed that email, folded it, and placed it on the breakfast table beside another paper. A contract. No division of assets. No lawsuits. No scandal. Just one line. We remain silent if you agree to leave. She left 3 days later. No apology. No goodbye hug. Just a clean house and 2 unwashed coffee mugs. I never told anyone, because in this society, men betrayed aren't allowed to cry. They're only allowed to stay silent and move forward as if nothing ever broke. But inside me, there's still an empty space where memories of a woman who once said, "I love you," with a world in her eyes now haunt like a silent ghost. And I write this chapter not to accuse anyone, but to remind myself, some clauses in life are only signed in silence. And the cost of silence is sometimes the part of your soul you never get back. I remember that day clearly, a gray Sunday morning in March, but inside me, it felt like embers had been quietly burning for years. The church was packed, not because it was Sunday, but because Grace, my daughter, had returned after 3 years of silence. And today, she was the one preaching. They called her the prodigal lamb who found the light. But I knew better. Grace hadn't gotten lost. She had walked away, bold, proud, and broken, because I had left her no place to return to. Grace stepped up to the pulpit in a dark blue dress, modest, but not submissive. The room held its breath. She bowed her head, then spoke, her voice low and clear. I'd like to speak today about silence and truth. I clenched my hands. People around me nodded in pious agreement, unaware they were about to hear a family drama story disguised in scripture. Grace began telling a story about a man who cheated on his best friend's wife. She didn't say names, but eyes began to turn to me and to my husband, sitting beside me, exhaling slowly as if any sound might betray him. It was an infidelity story no one in town ever dared name. But Grace, my child, remembered every detail. The man was forgiven, but the woman who told the truth was cast out, called a divider of families. Her voice didn't falter. Not once. I remembered that night. Grace was just 19, standing in front of her father and me, trembling as she said she saw him kiss another woman. I slapped her, told her she was lying, accused her of breaking the family with teenage emotions. But truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand and wait. Today she stood on the pulpit in a plain dress and declared, "Forgiveness cannot be demanded by those who have never listened." That was the moment I realized I was part of one of those family revenge stories, the deepest kind. Not carved with knives, but through the gaze of a daughter who had learned to turn her pain into prophetic speech. The crowd applauded. Eyes misted, but I sat still. Not from shame, but because I understood Grace wasn't just preaching. She was reclaiming herself. The Sermon on the Mount isn't just the words of Jesus. It's also the voice of those who were once silenced, now reclaiming the right to be heard. She ended and stepped down. I didn't cry. I only held my wedding ring. That silent witness to my role in that true infidelity story. That evening, I knocked on Grace's door. I said nothing. I just placed an old photograph in her hand of her as a child, standing between me and her father. On the back, I had written one line. "You don't have to forgive me, but I'm here, ready to learn how to be your mother again." Grace didn't speak, but she kept the photo. And for me, that was the real sermon, the sermon of a child who finally chose not to be silent. I used to think that if I were obedient enough, smart enough, patient enough, someday, I would be called by a name that meant I belonged somewhere. But the last name, Thurman, was never truly mine. I was the child no one claimed. Dropped off at my grandparents' house by my mother, Yvonne, when I was 4, like a package mistakenly delivered. From then on, I became the child of a mistake, living between official names, listening to family tales I had no right to be part of. There are no family portraits with me in them. My name never appeared in Grandpa's will. No one hugged me when I failed my college entrance exam. But I was the one they called when the kitchen caught fire, when Grandma got sick, when someone needed to carry responsibility without the right to ask for love in return. A family tale where I was the unnamed character. I stayed silent until the day my mother, who never once called me daughter in public, announced she was leaving the main house to my youngest brother, Jason. Even though I was the one who fixed the roof after Hurricane Katrina, the one who paid the bills during her 3 years in the hospital. When the lawyer read the will, I smiled. People thought it was acceptance. But really, it was the moment I realized something profound. Some forms of family betrayal don't come from being pushed away, but from being silently treated as if you don't exist. I left the house that day, carrying only an old wooden box. Inside were letters I never sent. Notes like, "Mom, I'm hurting. I got a scholarship. I'll be home on Saturday." All never sent, never received, never answered. I began writing, not for anyone else to read, but to remind myself I exist. I wrote everything down, from the look in my mother's eyes when she glanced at me like a housemaid, to Grandma's missed grasp when I stood at her bedside. I didn't seek revenge by cutting ties. I chose human revenge, to live well. I earned my master's degree. I founded the Naomi Scholarship Fund. Every year, I awarded to a child abandoned by their own family. They say burning revenge is the fire of unresolved rage. For me, it's a quiet flame, shining light on the shadows of rejection so I could stop believing I was the mistake. The last time I saw my mother, she was in a nursing home. I visited, sat by her bed, and said, "Mom." She opened her eyes, not surprised, not emotional, just said, "Naomi, you finally found yourself." I smiled, not because I forgave her, but because I no longer needed to be claimed. Because I finally understood, no surname is greater than the one you give yourself. And revenge, sometimes, is simply the choice to live meaningfully in a world that once told you that you didn't deserve to exist. I started writing this letter on an October afternoon when the air smelled of burnt wood and decaying maple leaves. The wind slipped in through a half-open window, cold, but not cold enough to close. I let it in, as if I was finally brave enough to stop shutting everything out. This letter is for my mother, but I'm not sure I'll send it. I might burn it, or fold it neatly and place it in the old drawer where she keeps unread Christmas cards. Because the truth is, I don't need her forgiveness, and I didn't write this to ask for it. I wrote it because I need to hear myself say what I've spent 30 years learning to swallow. My mother used to tell me I was born on a rainy day. Grandma wasn't at the hospital, and my father had gone fishing. She claimed she cut the umbilical cord herself. I was strong, she always said, but no one told me she cried. No one ever admitted that she looked at me and saw not life but a mistake. I grew up in a house full of unsaid things, family tales told through silence, sidelong glances, and dinners where no one made eye contact. I learned to be agreeable, to avoid being the crack that broke the surface tension. Then came the day I discovered Dad had someone else. Not a one-time fling, but another woman saving his phone under Pastor John. It was one of those cheating stories where, when the truth comes out, I didn't cry. I looked at my mother, and she, instead of being heartbroken, looked at me like I was the one who had ruined our family. I don't blame her for staying, but I can't forgive her for teaching me that love meant enduring, that silence was sacred, that forgiveness was a duty. Maybe she thinks I'm angry. I'm not. I've simply stopped agreeing. This isn't one of those revenge stories with triumph at the end. I don't want my mother to hurt. I just want to live without carrying everyone else's wounds as a family obligation. Mom, I write this letter to say I'm not coming back. Not because I hate you, but because I've stopped trying to become someone you could finally accept. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness, because I did nothing wrong when I chose to walk away from a home where love always came wrapped in fear and silence. I just want you to know I am still alive, whole, peaceful, free, even if you never called me your pride. Even if you always spoke of me like a sorrow you had to endure, I am a human being. I have value, and I've stopped waiting for the day you'll see that. I bought the cabin with part of my retirement money, not because I needed a place to rest, but because I needed a place where the world didn't know who I was. It sat halfway up the mountain, with rotting red shingles, dark wooden walls, and an old mirror welded into the sink. I had planned to toss that mirror out, but somehow, I didn't. I came here after a long spring, when the things that once anchored me had splintered, not with a bang, but with steady, hairline fractures that stretched across 30 years of marriage. I found out my husband was unfaithful not from anyone else, but from his own voice, a soft tone I once believed was reserved for me, now echoing in the living room as he spoke to a woman named Claire over the phone. I eavesdropped, not proudly but without regret. Some infidelity stories begin with trust and end in bitter silence. He didn't know I heard. I didn't confront him. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something deeply. Sometimes, hidden revenge is letting truth reveal itself when the guilty believe they've escaped. I packed a few clothes, left, and didn't write a note. I wasn't angry, just depleted. I didn't run away. I simply stepped out of a betrayal story I had lived too long as an unnamed extra. Every morning at the cabin, I brewed coffee and looked at myself in the dusty mirror. And strangely, the woman staring back didn't look like me. She had dark circles, an understanding gaze, and a smile that didn't need anyone's approval. I began speaking to her, not aloud, just inside. I told her about the times I forgave for the children, about that email I ignored because my husband said, "She's just an old coworker." I talked, then I sat still, One day I wrote a letter to Claire, not to scold, not to curse, just to tell each thing. That he liked cinnamon in his coffee. That he forgot anniversaries but remembered every former assistant's name. That I had once loved him like a limb I could not amputate. I didn't send the letter. I folded it neatly, slid it into the drawer beneath the mirror, where the woman in the mirror could see. Because sometimes, hidden revenge isn't about making someone else hurt. It's about making them realize the woman they left behind stood up, faced herself, and did not shatter. I stayed in that cabin for 6 more weeks. Each day, I looked more like the woman in the mirror, not because I aged, but because I stopped denying myself. And if anyone asked why I left, I wouldn't say, because my husband cheated. I would say, because I betrayed myself for too long, through silence, through bowed love, through waiting for someone else to define my worth. I'm not waiting anymore. I am the woman in the mirror, and she at last has been seen.